Welcome back, folks. Welcome to day two of the Southeast Bringing the Farm to School Regional Facilitator Workshop. We hope you enjoyed the day yesterday and are looking forward to uh, taking a deeper dive into the trainer's toolkit over the next 3 days. As we start off day two together, we want to remind and encourage you folks to turn your cameras on as you're able to. And while we ask that you stay muted, if you're not speaking, please feel free to come off mute and ask questions, share any thoughts or feelings, and just take the space that you need while we're here together. Thank you again for sharing these next few days with us. So before we jump into today's discussion, we want to take a moment to acknowledge that today also marks the anniversary of the violent death of George Floyd and the subsequent call for action for Black lives. We just want to take a quick, brief moment to reflect on that and our own commitment to racial justice in a world without violence. Okay, thank you for that. So before we get started today, I would love to hear from you all. I would love to hear your thoughts about the workshop thus far. And yeah, just want to know what you're excited for today. What are you most interested about learning today? So feel free to unmute yourself, share any thoughts or suggestions that you have right now. And yeah, feel free to also utilize the chat as well.
I'll just say that I'm really excited about the team that we have who showed up from Kentucky.
Great, wonderful. Great. Seeing lots of excitement. All right, well, feel free to continue chiming in as we move along, but glad to know that there is some interest and excitement moving forward into day two. So I want to take a moment to remind you all that the participant home-based document has all the links you'll need to follow along with us, including links to the Jamboards, the website, digital versions of the trainer's toolkit, as well as the workshop agenda for the week. If you have any trouble finding anything, just let us know. We can definitely support you in that. So today we'll be focused on doing a deep dive into the producer curriculum, specifically the introduction, module 1 and module 2. Throughout the day, you'll see, you'll also have the opportunity to work within your state breakout sessions and explore ideas of curriculum ideas, as well as opportunities to think forward to your local producer training. We'd like to remind you that the implementation of the training may look different from state to state and training to training. And as we talked about yesterday, you may form a team to plan a standalone training, or you may build pieces of the Bringing the Farm to School training to enhance other producer focused events. We'll highlight and uplift different ways the curriculum is flexible and can adapt to different formats and approaches. So before we review each module, I'd like to orient you all to how we'll be approaching the module overview. For each producer curriculum module, we'll be walking through the content section by section, in some cases, slide by slide, to familiarize you to the content and the modules and help you envision and plan for presenting the curriculum material yourself. We encourage you to follow along in both the facilitator guide and the producer workbook, and we'll give you page references throughout to help you follow along and stay on track, as you see here in the example now. As we move forward through the modules, we'll put out activities to give you the opportunity for local customization, facilitator tips, as well as just new ways for you to think about how to present to producers. Now I'm going to turn it over to Lacey to get us started with the producer curriculum overview. Take it away, Lacey.
Thank you, Tomas, and welcome back, everybody. It's wonderful to see you again for day 2. To get us started, I'm going to start by orienting us to an important tool that will help you understand kind of the full picture of content in the curriculum, and also to help you think about in planning and organizing the content for your local producer training, or as you think about what you might want to incorporate into other trainings. So we're going to start by looking at what we're calling the training module outlines. So if you want to grab your facilitator guide, and again, the facilitator guide is the yellow banded one here. In the facilitator guide, you can find the outlines for the training module outlines starting on page 11. So the purpose of these training module outlines is to provide an easy to use reference and snapshot of all of the module content in one place. So as you get to know the curriculum, you can use these outlines to get to know how the content fits together piece by piece, what the content covers, and how all of the elements align. And you can also utilize it to think about specific topics you might want to cover with producers. If you find producers need some specific information on understanding RFPs, you can find that area covered, and then you can find the resources and information that help align with that content area. So we encourage you to come back and continue to use these outlines both today as we move along. We know we're going to be throwing a lot of information at you, so if you need to kind of reorient and see where we are in this broader scope, you can keep coming back to these module outlines. And as you move forward and start your planning and training, to continue to come back to these resources as tools. So again, if you are in page 11 here, you will see where we start on those training module outlines. You can also see, we know it's a lot of back and forth, but want you to be oriented with all of the resources in your producer workbook, which is that green version. Producers have their own version of these outlines, really highlighting the information that the producer is going to need. And so those outlines are embedded at the start of each of the sections of the modules within the producer outline. So we'll take a closer look at those in a few minutes, but just to orient you that we're going to be looking primarily at those outlines in the facilitator guide, but knowing that producers have another version that are oriented specifically to producers. So let's start by taking a look at the different components that are a part of these training module outlines. So here is the training module outline for module 1. You're going to find that on page 12 in your facilitator guide. So within each of these training module outlines, you'll see specific section topics. You'll see the training topic, duration, and format. So that's going to be the breakdown of training topics, those high-level topics covered in each module, as well as information that you need about an estimated time. So that's going to help you plan accordingly when you're creating those plans and agendas for your trainings. We're going to see how it's going to fit into your trainings. We also have the high-level learning objectives. So again, if there are specific topic areas you want to cover, this is a great place to look for those specific learning objectives that are going to be addressed in each section. We also have the content and core concepts. So that provides more detailed information about how those learning objectives are addressed and the specific topical areas that are addressed within each section. And then finally, we have the training activities and materials. And this is a great place to see how all of those different case studies that we shared, the producer activities and worksheets that are found in the producer workbook, how all of those align with the training topics and the information that will be shared through each section. And you can see those are listed in details. If you look at the online version, there are even hyperlinks to many of those tools and resources, including the videos and case studies. So a great place you can kind of go directly to a lot of those resources from that online version of the facilitator's workbook, facilitator's guide. So again, just to understand the difference here for the producer version, this is the module 1 version for producers. So that really highlights those components that are going to be most relevant for producers, including what they're going to learn, those learning objectives for each section, just an outline, more general outline of the content that's covered. And then it references back again to those learning materials though. So they know which worksheets, they know which case studies and resources align with each of those learning objectives. So that's a high-level overview. I'm just going to quickly walk through each of the modules, and we're going to take a look at those curriculum outlines. So you can kind of get a bigger picture. And then as we walk through today and tomorrow, we're going to be diving deep into each of these modules. But again, I encourage you to continue to come back to these resources so you can see how all of these pieces align together and the different components within each module. So we're going to start today with our introduction. Jenny Lee is going to dive into the introduction section, which is focused on the power of farm to school. Then we'll move on to module 1, where we really dive into getting to know school markets. And that includes 2 content areas plus 1 optional module content area. So that's going to cover child nutrition programs as well as local food sourcing and procurement. And then we've got optional materials focused around CACFP and summer food service programs specifically. Then later this afternoon, we're going to hear with Robert around module 2, around selling to schools. So you can see the breakdown here in the 2 areas of focus, where he'll be discussing farm to school market channels and selling to school districts. Tomorrow, we're going to start our day hearing from Margot, who's going to cover module 3, which is focused on choosing the right product to sell to schools. So that's going to include overviews of choosing the right product and product development. And then finally, module 4, which is a big one with lots of great content information, we'll be hearing from Andy tomorrow afternoon. And the focus here is around growing for schools. So we have a number of different segments here around growing for schools. And again, as you think about flexibility, you can look at what's going to be a best fit for your audience, but it includes sections focused on business planning, around scaling up, around production and planning, around livestock production, and around navigating food safety. Again, you can see all of these laid out between pages 11 and 17 in your facilitator guide, and I encourage you to continue to follow along as we move along through the day. We also have a guide for the conclusion and action planning you'll see here, which is another way that we just kind of tie all of these pieces together and all of the resources and content that we cover throughout the modules. So with that, we're going to start our deep dive, and I will turn it over to Jenny Lee to start with the introduction.
Great. Thanks, Lacey. And hi, everybody. I'm Jenny Lee Harris with the National Farm to School Network, and I'm excited to start digging into the curriculum content with you all. So we'll be spending the next 30 minutes or so walking through the introduction content found in both the facilitator guide and the producer workbook. So we're going to sort of be looking at both resources as we go along. And as mentioned earlier, I'm going to be referencing where we are in each resource by including visual cues like the slide image that's shown here on the screen, as well as page numbers and references throughout. So if at any point you can't sort of find where you are or need something repeated, just feel free to drop that question into the chat. And I'll also be pausing periodically to take questions as well. So the image in the top right corner of this first slide is the first slide in the introduction slide deck. So you'll see a matching thumbnail of this slide on page 19 of the facilitator guide. So let's just get ourselves oriented. On the next slide, you'll see sort of the beginning of the introduction in both the facilitator guide and the producer workbook. So let's turn to page 18 in the facilitator guide right now, and I'm going to be flipping there with you, as well as page 2 of the producer workbook. So that's where the introduction starts for both in both of those resources. So everyone should really have both of these resources open. Like I said, we're going to be navigating through these together. And if you don't have hard copies, you can access them digitally on our website as well. And I believe Tammy had put that in the chat for us. Okay, so this is how the module starts in both the facilitator guide and producer workbook. So you'll see in the facilitator guide, there's this about section, right? And it includes that curriculum outline, the training module outline that Lacey just went over. And it also includes core concepts, digging deeper into core concepts, so additional resources for core concepts, a list of case studies, as well as key terms that will appear in the module. Okay, so this info is really intended to be that snapshot of what you'll find in the module for those planning purposes. And in the producer workbook, as Lacey pointed out, you know, they will have and they will see a streamlined version of the curriculum outline followed directly by content. So on the next slide, we'll revisit the curriculum outline. In the introduction, the content and core concepts are focused on introducing farm to school to producers and really setting the stage for understanding both the demand for local food and school meals, as well as the benefits for producers in selling to school markets. So a big part of the introduction is providing an opportunity for seasoned producers to share their stories with farm to school. So really building in those peer learning opportunities. And we'll talk more about this later, but this is really where customization of the module comes in. So finding local producers in your state doing this work to share their stories. So we estimate about 30 to 45 minutes for the introduction. And the length of time you spend will mostly depend on how many local producer stories that you highlight in this section and sort of how much you want to spend in grounding folks in understanding farm to school. So I will also add that this module introduces the concept of how producers can use goal setting and action planning to support their efforts in selling to schools. So, and then in that far right column, you'll see noted there that the materials needed include those farm to school success stories in your state, and also the school business action planning guide. So we'll get to that a little bit later. That's in the back of the producer workbook, and we'll look at that and at the end of the introduction today. Okay, so let's look at some of the pieces in the introduction. You'll see, again, you have the core concepts and the digging deeper into core concepts. So if you need a refresher for any of the core concepts listed in the module, so for the introduction, that's the core elements of farm to school, benefits of farm to school to producers, basic goal setting skills and action planning. So if you need any sort of additional information about these core concepts, that's where you look to the digging deeper into core concepts resources list, and that's at the bottom of page 18. So just wanted to pause and make sure everyone can sort of identify where those digging deeper resources are at the bottom of 18. So you can just use a thumbs up reaction emoji so I can see. Great, I'm seeing them come in. So you can see they're hyperlinked, right? So if you're accessing the digital version, you can just click that link and it'll take you to the resource. If you're not looking at it digitally and you want to look at where these live in the appendix, that's also where you can find them, and you can see the URLs completely spelled out. So if everyone can turn to page, quickly just to see page 108, we're gonna go to Appendix A. And that's where all the facilitator tools are, including these digging deeper resources. So you'll see in the middle of page 108, the list of those digging deeper resources with those URLs spelled out, also clickable, but you can also type those into your browser if you're accessing that way as well. And you can see all the other digging deeper resources for each module live in the Appendix A as well. Okay, so let's flip back to page 18. Let's go back. And we're now looking actually at the top of page 19. So this is where you'll see the link to click the slide deck to download. So Anna pointed this out yesterday. This is an editable file, right, for you to adapt as necessary. And this is also where you see the list of bringing the farm to school case studies. So for the introduction, we have a producer conversation, or sorry, a podcast conversation between a school buyer, so Natomos School District, and a small 2-acre farm, Fiery Ginger Farm, sharing their perspectives in the conversation on the importance of relationship building, maintaining relationships as it relates to farm to school. So that's a case study you might want to highlight to producers. Again, that's accessible on the website. And then lastly, in the background section, you'll see the key terms. So those are listed here, and you'll see as we move forward that in modules 1 through 4, there's actually a Jeopardy game option to support producers as they learn these new terms. And Lacey's going to talk a little bit more about the Jeopardy game when we get to module 1, but also just wanted to note at this time the glossary, right? So all of the key terms are defined in our glossary. So we're going to just take a moment to turn there as well. So if we go to page 105, you'll find in the facilitator guide, you'll find the glossary. And so you'll see what's shown on the next slide on the screen here, the image of the glossary of key terms. Okay, so I'm going to invite somebody to come off mute and find one of our key terms, which is whole farm goal setting. Can you find that in the glossary and define it for folks? You can come off mute and share that definition.
Distinct from other form planning approaches because it ties together all of the planning producers do for the whole farm. This holistic approach is based on the short and long-term vision producers and their families have for themselves and the farm.
Great, thanks so much. Yeah, so that's the last term in the glossary, right, on page 107. I know folks, thanks for humoring. I know folks know how to use a glossary, but just wanted to make sure everyone knows that this resource is here, and particularly this list of acronyms. And even more importantly, if you turn to page 62 in the producer workbook, so I know I told you we'd be flipping through both of these here. The glossary for the producer workbook is on page 62, and it's the same glossary, but it's a really great resource to make sure you're pointing producers to as they may be learning a lot of new terms, including those acronyms on page 64. Okay, so that's an overview of what you'll find at the beginning of the introduction, and as well as sort of what you sort of see at the beginning of each module. And before we dig into the slides, I just wanted to pause to see if there are any questions about some of that beginning background information section. All right, well, if any come up, feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your hand or interrupt me. Okay, so let's turn back to page 19 of the facilitator guide. So this is the very first slide in the introduction after the title slide, and it's really intended to contextualize the individual local producer training that you're going to be hosting in your state, sort of within that broader training program objectives, right? And so the objectives for the training as an entire program are bulleted here, right? It's to increase producers' knowledge and understanding of farm to school programs, increase participation in farm to school activities, and increase the overall amount of local foods that producers sell to schools, right? So there's going to be more specific learning objectives embedded in each module, which we've already seen sort of where those live in the curriculum outlines. And we're going to look more closely at what those are for the introduction in just a moment. And I just wanted to remind folks before we move on about the format, right? So you'll notice for each slide in the facilitator guide, there's talking points for you. And as we go through the modules today and tomorrow, we're going to be pulling from those talking points and summarizing where necessary. So just as a reminder, these are the talking points that you can adapt and make fit to your producer audience. And making sure that you're putting in your own regionalization to these talking points. And it's also these talking points that have been translated into that producer-friendly language in the producer workbook, so that content is aligned there. All right, so let's move on to page slides 3 and 4. So we're still on page 19, and we're going to hear a lot more about how to conduct evaluations for your trainings on Thursday this week from NYU. But I did want to point out that when you're hosting your training and using the introduction slide deck, slides 3 and 4, which are shown here on the left side of the screen, will prompt you to initiate the pre-training survey process for producers at that time before you get into any content. And so during your framing for the pre-training survey, it's really important to emphasize that you hope producers will help with evaluating the training, which will ultimately improve future trainings for their fellow peers, right? But also looking at overall impact. So for example, a producer's readiness to sell to schools. And similarly, you will be prompted to do the post-training survey during the conclusion of the modules, which we'll get to tomorrow. So I also wanted to flag before we moved on about evaluation. You can see on the right side here, there is an evaluation protocol document This is an Appendix D of your facilitator guide. We're not going to flip to there now, but it does live in the facilitator guide. And the one that's in your actual guide is for in-person trainings. But you may have already noticed that you have an additional adaptation to the evaluation protocol for virtual trainings, and that lives in your workshop folder that you received in the mail. Okay. So again, if you have any questions about evaluations at this point, really, hold those, write them down, and save them for the session with NYU, because they'll be able to provide you with those answers. But wanted to flag that you're seeing those in the introduction here as well. All right, so let's actually dig into the learning objectives here. So we're on page 20. This is slide 5. These are the actual learning objectives for the introduction. And so the introduction really is that sort of stage setting opportunity. It aims to support producers in gaining an understanding of what farm to school is and how it can benefit them. It's intended to help producers identify their motivations for selling to schools and really consider how their overall farm goals align with those motivations and values. So there's going to be some activities around that piece. And lastly, really to introduce that concept of action planning and goal setting as a tool that they can use to meet their farm and lifestyle goals through school sales. And so that's where the the school business action plan comes into play, and that action planning concept is something that's woven throughout the curriculum, okay? All right, so looking on the next slide, we see this is the first activity that you'll be doing with producers, and it's an icebreaker. It's an opportunity for folks to connect with each other in the room. And I just want to pause and say, so before I explain this activity, I want folks to take a moment to think of icebreakers that you've used in trainings, especially with producers that you really like, that you've had fun with, and we'll be sharing those shortly. So just take a moment to get one of those in your mind that you want to share with the group. All right, so hold on to that thought and we're going to come back to it. Okay, so you can see for slide 6, there is a facilitator prompt that's highlighted here, and this really describes the instructions intended for this icebreaker. So we recommend that you provide producers with an index card so that they can write down the answers to these questions that are shown on the screen here, really giving them some time to think about their answers on their own first. So this is the first time you're really asking them to sort of articulate why they're here, why they want to sell to schools, etc. And depending on the size of the group, you may be able to have the group share some of their answers as a whole group, or you may decide to break into smaller groups and share, or even turn it into a more involved sort of networking opportunity and do a handful of speed dating rounds where producers can connect with other participants 1 to 2 minutes at a time before moving on to the next person. So there's a lot of different ways that this can look, but we want to make sure producers are connecting with each other early on in the training and beginning to articulate their why. So why are they here? Why are they interested in selling to schools? And if they aren't in that place yet, this might be that first opportunity to sort of try some of those ideas on. Okay, so if you have any go-to icebreakers, you had one that you thought of earlier that you use during trainings, especially with producers, love for folks to come off mute and share, or drop in the chat for a moment so we can generate some other ideas that might be fun to plug in here.
We've recently done a couple of icebreakers involving like mini storytelling, like sharing a favorite memory about food or the craziest thing that ever happened to you on a farm.
Love that. Great. Oh, I see Tiffany shared, I love to ask what people wanted to be when they were 10 years old. That's a good one. All right, well, folks, think of others that they want to share. Drop them in the chat. I'm sure others always looking for fun icebreaker opportunities to sort of change it up. So feel free to share those in the chat. Great. All right, so we're going to move on and look at the sort of first content area, which starts on slide 7 of the facilitator guide. And that's where the content starts in the producer workbook on page 3. So I don't know about y'all, I'm still in the glossary of the producer workbook, so I'm going to flip back to page 3. Okay. So we're on page 20 of the facilitator guide, page 3 of the producer workbook. All right, so you'll see on the next slide, slides 8 through 10 in the facilitator guide, and then that content on page 3 of the producer workbook, this is where we begin defining what the core elements of farm to school are. And we want producers to have a general sense about these 3 aspects of farm to school, right? Procurement, education, school gardens, and where they could potentially plug in outside of selling to schools, of course, if they're interested and able, and really emphasize that the overall benefits of farm to school that they're going to continue to be learning about throughout the training are really amplified when the 3 elements are working in conjunction with one another, right? Reinforcing those impacts. And as described at the top of page 21 in those talking points in the facilitator guide, we want farmers to know that farm to school is unique in every community and that the training you've planned really is designed and customized with their specific needs and their offerings and products in mind, right? And so the producer workbook goes on to provide a general overview for producers about the demand and interest of local food being purchased and served in school meals. So listing out the number of school districts participating in farm to school, as well as the monetary investment in local communities through these programs. So sort of showing the demand there. And we want producers to start thinking about how their goals may align with selling to schools and see school districts as partners, right? See school districts, see what motivates them to buy from local producers. So that might be things like learning that school districts are interested in supporting local farmers and businesses and communities, that school districts are interested in increasing school meal quality and overall school meal program participation by purchasing from local producers, and that school districts are interested in increasing kids' willingness to try new fruits and vegetables, and also seeing how purchasing from local producers can align and support school wellness policies and other broader school board priorities. So those are just some of the motivations from the school district side that can really help producers identify their own motivations for selling to school and see schools as partners in this effort, right? And then on this, the bottom right slide here shown is slide 10, which is on page 21. And this illustrates the ways in which schools may partner with local farms and food businesses. So looking at what those partnerships look like, giving producers really a sense of the variety of ways that they can engage with schools and those interconnected benefits, right? So participating in a special school event or hosting a taste testing that then ultimately results in increased sales from school districts, from families, from communities, and seeing those, again, those interconnected benefits of partnering with schools. And you'll see actually in the talking points on page 21, a list of examples that we've put here of those types of partnerships. But I wanted to take a moment to pause and do a poll and see what are the common, I guess the 3 most common partnerships between schools and farmers that you would want to highlight in your state, in addition to these listed here. And so this is, again, a regionalization opportunity to sort of share some of those partnership opportunities. So I'm going to pause and we're going to launch a poll to see what folks see most often in their state in terms of producer and school partnerships and working together. And if there's not something you see here that you want to elevate, particularly from your state, feel free to drop it in the chat as well. All right, so I'm seeing votes coming in. All right, it's looking like cafeteria promotion campaigns, like tasting activities, posters. That's taken the cake as one of the most popular ones. Farmer in the classroom, other educational events. Producer highlights in school menus look like coming in second there under farm tours. Great. And I just see Jeannie added crunch events, highlighting produce from the area during National Farm to School Month. Great. Awesome. So as many of you know, right, it's a really great opportunity to highlight these types of partnerships that producers can plug into and really show, the sort of holistic benefits of being able being able to engage with the community and sort of have that impact on their sales, right? So we can talk about that a little bit in the next section, which is those benefits of farm to school for producers. Sorry, can't get the poll thing out. Okay. So if we look at the next slide, slides 12 and 13, so that's on pages 21 and 22 of the Facilitator Guide. It's also, the information is captured at the bottom of page 3 in the producer workbook, but this includes a little bit of information about the financial impact and benefit of farm to school for producers, such as an increase in income from farm to school sales, of course, but also an establishment of long-term revenue streams for individual producers, an increase in market diversification, and just overall economic growth. So we want producers to take away that selling to schools and participating in farm to school programming, may benefit profitability either directly or indirectly. So of course, directly through increased sales to schools, but also indirectly through a diversified marketing strategy. So for example, marketing that might occur to students and families through the cafeteria, through special events, or farmers being able to use sort of their own promotional materials for other markets like farmers markets or restaurants as well, and seeing how that benefits them both directly and indirectly to be working to selling to schools. And this section also includes a snapshot of ways that farm to school may align with their farm goals. So they may be seeing motivations related to nourishing kids with their local produce, right? Or promoting agriculture as a career pathway for youth. And even just overall increasing the visibility of small and mid-sized farms in their communities. So this is a great opportunity to highlight that economic impact data, that farm to school participation data, if you have it for your state, and really just trying to contextualize the benefits for producers in their locale or similar locations can be really helpful in seeing that alignment and how that can benefit their business and operations. So if we look at the next section, this starts on, this is at the bottom of page 22 of the Facilitator Guide. These slides 14 through 16 are really intended to be a spot for producers to hear from a producer about their own experience in launching or expanding farm to school sales. So this might take the form of a small share out and discussion with a farm to school farmer champion in your state. It could be a current USDA or former USDA farm to school grantee sharing their experience. You could even show a video of a producer sharing their farm to school story. And just wanted to note that the quotes on slides 14 through 16, these are real sharings from real farmers, but they're ultimately meant to be placeholders. So we really want the introduction to have those peer learning opportunities. And so in addition to planning a farm to school panel, as well as a site visit, we really encourage each state training team to think about can you generate a list of producers in your state that may be willing to pop in and share their story with other producers in an informal setting, such as a discussion or Q&A, or who may be able to provide pre-recorded content to share as well. So we do have dedicated breakout time to do that together this week, to generate that list, to think about how you might localize the training. So if you have any immediate ideas coming to mind, pull out that trainer action plan and jot that down and make sure to discuss it later with your group. So before we go into the last two sections here, I just wanted to pause for any questions. All right, I'm gonna take a sip of water. Okay. So on the next slide, we see this is where we start getting into the action planning piece. So goal setting and action planning is intended to help producers assess how their lifestyles, their farm landscape, their mission, their business can frame their market selection, right? And producers are going to review their goals and their motivations and see how that might align with school sales. So this is really this first part. They're trying to make this assessment of whether they want to pursue selling to schools, and if that aligns with their overall farm goals. And so this type of goal setting, as we heard earlier from the glossary, right, is referred to as whole farm goal setting. And there are digging deeper resources related to this concept, but all the basic info you need are going to be in the slides. Okay. All right. So page 4 of the producer workbook. So let's turn to page 4 of the producer workbook. You can see this this colorful Venn diagram. This is also slide 18 of the facilitator guide. This is where we begin to walk producers through thinking about their goals. So both on and off the farm, and how they may align or may not align with selling to schools. And the diagram shown in both of these resources illustrates those interconnected variables that really shape a producer's farm goals. So lifestyle goals, those community assets, marketing and profitability of their farm business, as well as their production capabilities. Okay, so at the end of the introduction, producers are going to spend time reflecting on these variables and which of them may relate to their goals and motivations for selling to schools. So we encourage trainers to start this conversation at this point by asking producers, do they have some sort of business plan in place? They likely do, and get them thinking about it from that perspective and how these variables may impact their decision to sell to schools. So the very first activity you'll be walking producers through that you'll see on the next slide is the school business assessment. And this assessment is introduced to producers on pages 4 through 5 of their workbook. So you can see at the very top of page 5 of the producer workbook is this sort of web with this green shape filled in on top of the web, right? So you can see that on the screen as well. Okay, excuse me. And this assessment is part of that school business action planning guide, which we're going to look at more closely in a moment. And similar to the trainer action plan assessment that we went over yesterday for trainers, right? This school business assessment for producers is going to help them identify areas that will be important for them to think about and plan for as they move through your training. So it's really intended to identify gaps in their skills and resources they may need before selling to schools. Okay. So I'm actually going to share my screen to walk through what it might look like to fill out one of these web assessments. Here we go. All right, are folks seeing my blank web? Great. All right, so the way that this works is that each the assessment is broken down into each sort of module content area in the curriculum. So you can start here at the top with goals, and each topic area then has a couple statements that they will rank themselves on. Okay, so basically a 5 means that they have sort of all the skills and knowledge needed for that statement, and a ranking of 1 is sort of they have very little skills or knowledge in that related to that statement, right? And so you can see we start first with goals, and this is really related to the content in the introduction. And then we go through the module content. So information around child nutrition programs, which is module 1, looking at selling to schools in module 2, product identification in module 3, and then growing for schools in module 4. So if I were to sort of walk through and pretend to be the farmer that made this filled out sample at the top of page 5 in the producer workbook, I'm going to start ranking myself here. So this first statement, my goals align with school. So I've already heard some great things about Farm to School, and I feel like my goals do align with school. So I'm going to give myself a 5 there. And then the second statement here, I understand school food purchasing practices. So this is really where I need support. I don't really know anything about how schools purchase local food. So I'm looking, I don't have the skills or knowledge that I need there. So then moving on to these other statements related to child nutrition programs. So I have experience selling to wholesale buyers. So I do have experience there, and I understand how to connect with school buyers. You know, I know how to connect with buyers. School buyers may be a little different, so maybe I need some support in knowing what those differences are, right? And then moving on to selling to schools. So I understand vendor requirements for school markets. So I might say that I feel kind of middle of the road here, need some support about what school markets might require. I understand how to manage school contracts. Yeah, so that's something I really need support in as well, because I haven't worked with schools before. I understand how my products fit in the school menu. So I have a good idea, right? Maybe I have a kid in school. I remember what school menus look like. I can, you know, have a good idea of what, but I need some more information. And then moving on to my products can meet school specifications and quantities. So I think so, but may need some more support there. I understand my costs of production and can price my products competitively. So yes, I know how to do that, feel comfortable there, and I have the infrastructure in place to meet school vendor requirements. So again, I'm not entirely sure what all the vendor requirements are, but I feel confident that I could probably meet them. And then I'm willing to become GAP certified and have a solid food safety plan. So I feel pretty good about my food safety, but I've heard some myths about what schools require or may not require. So I need more information on that one. And I feel confident in my production skills here. So at the end of this, and I'm going to struggle here, but you basically connect the dots, and you can kind of see, right, the spaces in which you filled out. These are the areas in which you are feeling really confident, and then where the web is sort of blank here is where you need support. So for this farmer, I'm feeling confident in my abilities to grow for schools and what my goals are, right? So that filled in space, but really need support, better understanding child nutrition programs, so where that blank area is, and how to actually sell to schools. So I'm a perfect candidate for this type of training, right? And really what you're trying to do is just give producers this opportunity to get a quick snapshot of what they want to hone in on and focus on in your training. So this particular farmer is going to be really interested in modules 1 and 2, right? And thinking about how they can sort of best utilize their time and effort throughout this training as well. All right. So I'm going to stop my share and we can go back to the slides. We have a few more slides together. Thanks, Lacey. If you can go back just one slide. So this is what I was just working off of, right? This blank sample assessment, and just wanted to point folks to that. That's on page 53 in the producer workbook. So there's not a copy of the blank web assessment in the facilitator guide, but it's in the producer workbook. So you can see that on page 53 of the producer workbook. And that's where you're going to direct producers to go to this page. Take about 5 to 8 minutes and fill this web assessment out, right? So if they have sort of a business plan in place and they've been thinking about this a little bit, they'll be able to fill this out pretty quickly. It's supposed to be sort of this gut reaction and just have an overall sense of what support they need moving forward. All right, so moving on, this is really the last section of the introduction. And, I mentioned this yesterday when someone asked this question, but the goal is that producers will leave your training with a school business action plan. So this action plan for what steps they need to take, both in the immediate and in the long term to sell to schools. And as I've already noted, this school business action plan, this starts on page 52 in the producer workbook. And it starts with the web assessment that we just went through. Okay, and as I think Tammy noted yesterday, right, you'll see throughout the curriculum that we've built in time at the conclusion of each module. So at the end of module 1, at the end of module 2, et cetera, we've dedicated time for producers to fill in their action plan in real time as they go along. Okay, so and I would just flag too, depending on your producer audience, it may be useful to provide some action plan samples just to demonstrate the variability among producers related to products and scales and farm to school experience. Okay. All right, so on the next slide, just again, we have the web assessments on page 52 and 53. And if you turn the page and look on the next slide on page 54 of the producer workbook, you'll see a checklist assessing what benefits of farm to school interest producers and what support they need to achieve farm to school related goals. So this checklist aligns with the content on slide 21 of the facilitator guide, which is, and also this image in the top right corner, right? That's slide 21 on page 24. And so at this point, you'll be introducing the idea of action planning and SMART goals with producers and setting them up to develop an action plan that includes their motivations to participate in farm to school, and really identifying those short-term and long-term goals for farm to school sales, the value that they can provide schools, those action steps that are needed, and any additional resources, contacts, and information that they need to implement their plan. So at this point, they've already taken the assessment. And at this point, you're going to prompt producers to take about 10 minutes, an additional 10 minutes to fill out the questions on page 54 of their workbook. So this checklist here. And this is really a culmination of the thinking that they've been doing this whole introduction, right? About benefits, about motivations, about their goals. So just to recap, at the end of the introduction, producers will have filled out both the school business assessment, the web assessment we walked through, and the benefits of farm to school checklist shown here. So ideally at this point, producers can move forward with this info, right? They've identified their strengths, their gaps, the benefits and goals related to selling to schools, and really that can support them throughout this training and really nail down and hone in on those strategies and goals related to selling to schools. And I did just want to add at this point too, that for additional support for preparing for this topic, this action planning piece, we have recorded training accessible on the website on how to use action planning to support producers. So I think someone can drop that in the chat for folks. But just for any additional support, and we walk through examples of how to fill out the action plan with producers. We hear from producers sharing their experience as well. So it's a great additional sort of training resource to look at for additional support on this topic. All right, so I'm going to pause here and just with our remaining few remaining minutes before our short break, and just pause to see if there are any questions. I know it's a lot of different pieces. I introduced a new tool. We were looking through both Facilitator Guide and the Producer Workbook, so feel free to ask any questions you may have. Yeah, I see a question. How long would the introduction take to complete? So yeah, this is, we estimate about 30 to 45 minutes in the curriculum outline, but this one I think is probably one of the more variable ones because I think it really depends on what sort of peer learning opportunities you want to build in. There is the icebreaker. We do recommend sort of having those producer spotlight moments where you might be able to do a discussion or Q&A or even just show a video. It really depends on how much time you want to spend there and that piece. I think the action planning piece and really giving them time to assess and do the web assessment, do the benefits checklist is around 20 minutes. I think it's also going to depend on the size of the group that you have and sort of what support they may need. If they're coming in with their sort of business plan in place, so they have a really good sense of some of these pieces around their potential ability to sell to schools, as well as how their goals align, will obviously make that process a little bit quicker. So I think it could vary a good bit, and may be good to sort of have some buffer time in the introduction, so that they feel really, really grounded before moving into the other content. All right, so if folks are thinking of other questions, again, feel free to interject those. The last thing I wanted to show, which is on the screen here, is just the other components of the action planning guide, right? So if you're in the producer workbook where we just were, right, the first 2 pages again are the web assessment, the benefits checklist, and then you can see starting on page 55 is listed here, the end of module check-ins. Okay, and this is where you're going to guide producers to come back to at the end of each module to complete this quick check-in around the module objectives. And so as NFSN and NCAT team members go through the rest of the modules today and tomorrow, you'll continue to see those end of module check-in prompts for producers to revisit their action plan. And these check-ins are really just intended to be a jumping off point so that producers can then add those immediate next steps and timeline pieces related to the content in their actual action plan table. So the action plan table, which is shown on the right side of the screen, is what you'll see when you turn the page in the producer workbook, excuse me, starting on page 56. So each module gets its own table, and you can see there's a column for short-term strategy, recommended action steps, and action timelines. So this is where you're going to be encouraging producers to write in those action steps and those things that they need to address anything that that they need to address for any given topic area. And so the action plan table for each module continues on pages 56 to 57, all the way through module 4, and then culminates in this sort of summary table on page 61. Okay, so this is where you're sort of tying all these pieces together, your farm to school market channel, your values pitch, key resources, key products, key partners, et cetera, that producers will walk away with at the end of the training. And we're going to revisit this summary table together during the conclusion tomorrow. So with that, if there are any remaining questions, feel free to ask them now. Otherwise, I think we'll have a short break before we get into module 1. All right, folks. Well, if you think of anything, just let me know. But I think we can aim to be back at, doing time zone math, 1:35 to dig into module 1. Thanks, y'all.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We are getting ready to dive into Module 1. Module 1, we are all about getting to know school markets. So in this module, we're really focused on what producers need to know about school food programs. And I think Glenn yesterday really teed this up nicely in how he was sharing this need for the shared language for producers to be able to know how to talk to know the challenges and barriers and opportunities for school food service and creating those relationships. So I really appreciate him highlighting that in what he was sharing. So I think that teases up nicely for what we're going to be talking about in Module 1. One thing I really want to highlight in Module 1 is just the ability, and remind you again, the opportunities to customize based on what your producers need and want to know. There's a lot of content in Module 1, and there may be elements that are less of interest in the producers you're particularly working with. There may be content that is more of interest and more relevant to the producers you're working with. So just want to underscore again the opportunity to utilize what works best for your producers, and kind of pick and choose that content that's going to really support your producers in being able to build those strong relationships with school buyers and be able to understand where they're coming from and have that shared language and conversation. So let's get oriented to the materials here. We are going to be on page 25 of your facilitator guide. Again, you'll see that outline, the content outline that you're getting very familiar with, I'm sure. And then we're going to be on page 6 of your producer workbook. That's where the module 1 content starts in that producer workbook. As a reminder, there is also the module 1 slide deck that's available online, and all of those thumbnails, footnotes, thumbnails, whatever body part, thumbnails you'll see in your facilitator guide as we move forward align with all of those slide decks that you find online. So let's keep going here. So again, as we get oriented and jump into the module, we'll come back to seeing that training outline. Again, keep coming back to this. You'll find it in two places as a reminder. You find that at the beginning of each module, and then you'll find all of those together at the beginning of the facilitator's guide as we went through. Again, these are great places to go back, remind yourself what the content is, and all of the resources that go along with each content as you're moving forward in planning. So in module 1, you'll see we've got 3 sections, one of which we qualify as optional content, though obviously all of this is optional, how you pick and choose to use it. But these first sections that we really emphasize and think are most relevant to most producers are going to be section A around child nutrition programs and getting to know and understanding child nutrition programs. And then section B, local food sourcing and procurement and school meal programs. So that's going to be the content that really sets the stage for future modules and helping producers understand how their products fit into schools based on those school needs and priorities. So as Jenny Lee well acquainted us with, we've got the same format of introductory material at the beginning of the module. A lot of this material, again, is aimed at the trainer or the facilitator to help ensure that they have the appropriate language, that they have the background, if there are questions about content, or if the trainer or facilitator wants to dive in a little bit deeper on content and increase their knowledge, there are materials here around those, understanding those core concepts and then digging deeper, just like we saw in that introduction, and you'll see throughout the rest of the modules as well. We also have here a list of the case studies that are relevant to this module area. We'll be using some of these case studies and activities with producers and referencing back to those. And it's also a great place to just continue reference and recommend producers go back to for further learning or to see these ideas and concepts in action. We also have those key terms that are relevant to this section, as well as facilitators tips, those kind of high-level facilitator tips to keep in mind as facilitators are working through this section with producers. So you'll see the same format in each module as we work through the content. So let's jump into module 1 and our learning objectives around module 1. So you can see here the learning objectives. Through module 1, our aim is for producers to understand the scope and diversity of child nutrition programs, to understand menus, how schools process food and prepare meals. And the aim in understanding that, we need producers to know enough to understand how their products meet those needs and understand how those products connect to the work and the process and the preparation of school meals. We also want producers to have enough information about the basic regulations governing school food procurement and really how that impacts how child nutrition program directors and practitioners are sourcing their foods and purchasing local foods. So really enough information to understand how that's going to impact how they have to talk to and sell to schools. Great. So let's get into launching into these activities. So we're starting activities. We really want to start to get producers engaged. And as you can see in the outline and even the objectives, there may be some language that is unfamiliar. And as Jenny Lee talked about in review, we've got a really extensive glossary to help producers understand. And our first activity here that we recommend as an optional applied activity is a way for producers to kind of dig into that vocabulary and dig into that glossary. So that first applied activity that we recommend is to do a Jeopardy game. Bring you back right back to elementary school to be thinking about how to connect with that language and encourage producers to dive into that glossary. So within the facilitator guide, you'll see specific information, even a nice link there to instructions about how to create an interactive PowerPoint Jeopardy game to help producers dive into those vocabulary. So we won't be playing one today, just for time constraints, but I encourage you to play with that a little bit and find ways to engage producers right from the beginning to look at the content in a different way and start to speak up and use their voices in the room as well. So after we've kind of oriented to the purpose, we've oriented to some language, we're going to dive into section A, which is all about child nutrition programs. So we start this section with an opportunity for state and regional customization. Again, we really want each of these trainings to be focused on what the opportunities and current practices are within your state or region to help really connect producers to that local opportunity. So here we offer you the opportunity and a slide to be able to customize around child nutrition programs in your state or locale, specific local purchasing by the numbers to again really uplift the opportunity specific to your state. And the aim is to start to again really emphasize the market opportunity that school markets are in your location specifically, and start to build those connections to the local schools and the local school market and help producers think about how they can fit into the specific place. You can see here we even offer a regionalization tip. If you don't know where to find all of this information about your state or locale, we have links there to help you find that information to be able to share with producers and make this really feel specific to your location. So after we kind of center folks in our location, we also want to help producers see what farm to school can look like in action. So we recommend starting with a video. I'm going to show you an example one, but again, we really recommend that you try to find one that is around your region. Many states I know have great promotional videos and that highlight case studies in their state, and we'll be doing some brainstorming around that. But I'm going to share a sample video here from New Jersey that is just one example of how you can show how producers are connecting with schools. Let me get queued up here.
Our farm to school programming started about 3 years ago when we first moved to this site at Cherry Valley Cooperative Farm by partnering with the Princeton Montessori School. And since then, we realized that we wanted to expand and have a larger impact with schools that are not just private schools like public school systems. So we found out about this grant and thought that it would be a great opportunity to expand the program that we've been working on and bring it to a school district that's part of the National School Lunch Program to have a larger impact. There was a blank canvas when they walked in here, and then they saw a giant pile of materials of pipes and strings and hammers. Then an hour and a half later, the excitement that the kids have, oh my God, we built that, I can't believe that we did that, they could actually see the work that they just did physically. That's a very powerful thing.
It was so fun just to be able to walk inside of it and be like, I built this, and just have that sense of achievement. It was really fun.
We brought in asparagus and we prepared it a couple of ways. They got to taste it raw and they got to taste it also roasted with a little bit of salt and a little bit of lemon. And this way they could see how cooking and seasoning changes the flavor, and they got to interact with the farmers who could explain how these things are grown.
To see young kids get excited about vegetables is something I never expected. It was just amazing.
Obesity is skyrocketing, Diabetes is skyrocketing. We're bringing more population to this earth, and we're consuming a lot of the natural resources. So this is a big rooted problem that not one person or one organization can change. However, by educating our youth and helping them be part of the solution versus contributing to the problem, I think it's a responsibility that I think we all share.
I think this work is really important to be doing in New Jersey because I think a lot of people in New Jersey, or people passing through New Jersey, depending on where they are, might not think that a lot of food is being grown here, but there is actually so much food production, really good food production, and I think it's important that we highlight that.
So there you can really see, the opportunity for farmers to see what it means to connect to communities in schools and get food into schools and what impact that's having on kids and how excited they are to have that connection with farmers. And again, we encourage you to find those videos within your locale and within your state. I know that you all have some really great videos showing that process and different elements of farm to school. Let's get back to our slides here. So again, we're really trying to connect producers back to and understand our school nutrition programs. So we want them to start connecting their ideas about school nutrition and understanding what school nutrition programs can look like now. So one of our first activities is for them to think about and reflect on what are their school meal memories. We saw how impactful school meals and food in schools can be in that video. And what do they think about when they think about school meals? So I'd love for folks to take a minute to think about your school meal memories. What's that first thing you think about when you think about school meals? And add it to the chat box for us. Octagonal orange pizza. And that's always a big theme, right? The different shapes. Rectangular pizza and cubed pepperoni. Everybody is eating pizza at school, huh? So by asking producers to think about what their association is, we want them to think about how different that looked in the video that we shared, that kids were getting fresh asparagus, that they were incorporating those fresh local products, and it wasn't all about rectangular pizza, and to be thinking that school nutrition programs really have the opportunity to prioritize food that is appetizing and prioritize the quality of food and thinking about where it comes from, just like the producers are. There's a lot of themes around cheese here. Canned veggies. Well, thanks for sharing your thoughts. And again, hopefully, I know that all the work that you are saying, you're saying that this doesn't necessarily have to be the norm anymore, and that there are a lot of school nutrition programs that are really prioritizing this food. We want to make sure that producers understand that and understand that the priorities of school can also align with their priorities. So after we have some engagement and got producers talking to one another, maybe laughing a little bit about the ideas and the memories that they share, we really want to bring them into orienting them around child nutrition programs. So in this section, we orient producers around what school meals look like now and how they can be delicious and full of local food. So we break down the language here about the programs we'll be discussing. And I saw a note in the chat box that we'll address around the programs we're really specifically talking and honing in here. We know that the language child nutrition programs is not necessarily producer friendly. So we want to be a little more open with our language as we move forward. So from here out, we use the language of school meal programs. And so for the purposes of this section of the training, the ones that we're going to cover today, we're talking about school meal programs that are implemented kind of generally within the walls of the schools within the general school day. So we're really focusing a little bit more on National School Lunch Program, Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program, and School Breakfast Program. And that's certainly not to say that there aren't other great opportunities with the Child and Adult Care Food Program, the Summer Food Service Program, or Seamless Summer Option. And that's where that optional module content comes in, where we provide specific information focused on that opportunity. But we wanted to just kind of streamline our language and be talking about the same programs throughout this section. But just as a reminder, we do have that optional content at the end. So after we orient our producers to what are school meal programs and get that shared language around school meal programs, we come back a little bit more to the nitty-gritty of school meal programs, always thinking with that bigger picture purpose of what does a producer need to understand to best do business with school buyers. So on slide 12 here, just to reorient us and following along with the facilitator guide, we're on page 30 and 31 with the content. Slides 12 and 13, we're talking first about those school meal programs by the numbers. And you may have set that stage with some of your local information, and you can again customize here with some of that localized information. But this slide here really talks about that big picture purchasing impact and opportunity through these different programs of National School Lunch Program and Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program. Again, we also encourage you to kind of update and make sure these numbers are up to date based on the timeline, knowing that some of these trainings may not happen until later in the year or the next year, and we provide links and resources for you to be able to update these numbers as well. On slide 13, we really highlight here those key players of farm to school. You know, these producers are going to be at a training that was developed in partnership with the United States Department of Agriculture. They may be trained by a team that includes folks from the state agency. And we're talking about giving them tools to be able to connect with their local school food authority or school district. So this is an opportunity for them to be thinking about how all these key players fit together in their farm to school work, and what are the resources and tools that these different players can offer. So this is a great time to be able to share what are the other USDA resources? What do the different department state agencies offer to support producers in your state or area? So this is a great way to introduce people to the different key players in farm to school in your state or area. So after we are continuing to kind of orient to this big picture of farm to school as an option as a market, and who are these key players, we start to talk a little bit more about the key drivers that determine what school meal programs purchase and serve. That includes meal patterns and nutrition requirements and meal costs. Excuse me, sorry about that background. So we know that these big influences for for school food service are really around the meal program and the meal cost. And again, our aim is to provide producers enough information for them to understand that decision-making process for school food purchasers. So, you know, this is, again, Glenn really set the stage for us to understand what elements of the nutrition and meal components that producers might want to understand that impacts what product they might want to be able to share. So we heard about that requirement for red orange vegetables that was tough for some of those school food service programs. And Glenn identified that producers had this opportunity for sweet potatoes to fit that requirement. So again, this is an opportunity for us to be able to let producers know what are those meal patterns, what are school food service providers looking for, and start to think about how does the product that I grow fit into what food service are looking for already. So in that, we share kind of this big picture overview, and then we want to provide that specific time for reflection. So thinking really specifically about what am I already growing that's going to be a good fit for this school food program. When we move into meal cost, of course, we want to really make sure that producers acknowledge what school food programs are working with. We want them to understand and have a realistic view of the amount of reimbursement that programs are getting and what they're spending on food. But we also want to dispel some myths that school food programs can't afford local food and identify that school food programs have flexibility in how they create their menus and how they spend their funding to be able to prioritize local food. So we want to demonstrate that really the volume of meals served and created creates a big opportunity for sales. And there's a lot of spending from that school meal side. And we heard from Glenn yesterday, really elevating how that high number of consistent customers can be a really important opportunity for producers in that school meal program. So next, we dive a little bit into understanding the diversity of school meal programs. And we know that farmers are familiar with this idea that if you've seen one farm, you've seen one farm. But the same is true for our school meal programs. If you've seen one school meal kitchen, you've seen one school meal kitchen. And they're different and vary greatly across numerous aspects. So here we talk a little bit about the differences related to volume of product. So you can see on this chart here, we kind of break down what a different size school might need for different meal programs. So we talked a little bit about fresh fruit and vegetable program is going to need a different volume than if we're looking for a national school lunch program to be served at lunch. And the sizes of schools can vary greatly. So all of that is something to consider as a producer is thinking about their production volume and capacity and what type and size of program they might want to connect with. We also think it's important to producers to have a concept about what the production capacity and resources for creating and preparing meals is. We know that school meal kitchens, school program kitchens vary greatly from heat and serve, where they're just heating up food, to being able to do full scratch cooking. So we want to encourage producers to be able to think about and utilize, understand the different impacts. So I want to show you a video briefly that highlights how schools, how producers can kind of get a glimpse into what that school kitchen and school kitchen capacity can look like. Again, this is one video option. We encourage you to think about what other video options might be in your locale.
It's just a good concept for children to be able to relate where the food they eat comes from and know that it's right within their own region. Well, when we first found out that collards were going to be available through the Farm to School program, thought back to my childhood, and every time my mom cooked collards, it was in the biggest pot that we had in the house. So I looked in the back of our cook chill department. I said, there's 2 huge pots. I bet we could cook collards in those. It was a little trial and error at first, getting the seasoning right. And of course, the staff was a little wary at first. But if there's one constant, it's going to be change. We're going to be challenged and required to do new things, and that's a good thing because we are creating change in our children's dietary habits and improving them. So if we expect our kids to improve, then we've got to do the same.
They good. They look good. Very good, Sheree. They're ready to go.
We think that by creating demand, we can also help stimulate the supply. That's one of the largest barriers that we have, is strictly being able to get the supply at the level that we would use.
1 case of sweet peas, 1 case, 3 cans of mixed fruit, 4 bags of pears. Badler.
What's unique about us is we do deliver groceries and supplies to every school every day.
4 bags of collard greens.
That's about 22,000 lunches and close to 9,000 breakfasts a day.
2 cucumbers.
What we deliver today is served in the school the next day. Strawberries, watermelons, kids really like. But to get them to try the vegetables takes a little more encouragement sometimes. We found that it really helps to work with other stakeholders in the farm to school and agriculture industry. We're helping promote Food Corps and Cooperative Extension and North Carolina farmers. They're helping promote school lunch.
All right, I really love that video. I think it gives a lot of opportunity to see kind of the inside workings of the school nutrition program. It also elevates some of those partnership opportunities as well, when you see they're kind of doing that tasting opportunity to highlight what's being served in the kitchen. All right, let's get our slides back up here and reorient. All right, so that takes us in, once we've kind of gotten a sneak peek into what that kitchen might look like, that also gives us a little bit of opportunity to start to talk about what those school meal program models might be. So we can see in that video, we had a central kitchen that was distributing to other schools to be served the next day. And we want to highlight that that might be one model, but we might have some schools that are producing on site. We might have some that are using vended meals or another management company. So that's an opportunity for us to again talk about what that diversity looks like and how and who that might impact producers in being able to connect to the right person in that kitchen to have these conversations about purchasing food and who's making those decisions. So that brings us to our next applied activity. So just to orient us back to our resources, in our facilitator guide, we're on page 36. And this applied activity is coming up on slide 25. And our producer workbook, we've got an associated worksheet here. That's worksheet 1A, and you can find that on page 10. So I'll give everybody a minute to flip to our resources. So page 36 in facilitator guide and page 10 of producer workbook. So this activity is really around connecting and again, better understanding what is that market specific to your state or region. So for the purposes of this, we're going to be looking at the USDA Farm to School census data. We know we'll be getting new census data soon, so hopefully this will be updated pretty soon and you'll have more up-to-date info. But for now, I'd love people to navigate to the USDA Farm to School census website. If one of my colleagues could drop that in the chat box here. And we're going to take a look to see if you can find and share what our first question is here for producers in the worksheet. We'll get that in the chat box here. And our aim here again is for producers to walk through this worksheet to better understand what the demand is and also what are the specific products that are of interest to producers in, to school food service programs in their state or locale. All right, so we've got Mackenzie is already in there finding that. First question here, how much money is spent on local foods in your state? Mackenzie's got Kentucky. Thanks, Tammy, for dropping that in there. Liz has North Carolina. And fruit is top. Let's hear from a few other states about how much money is spent and then what are the most frequently purchased types of foods that you're finding. Fruits and veggies, says Holly. Samantha's got Tennessee in there. Great. So again, this is just a way for producers, and you can focus on the state level. If producers know what district they're in the vicinity of, if they know the school districts near them, they could explore the local school districts. So this is just a way for producers to kind of orient and better understand their local purchasing priorities within the school districts and school programs within their area. Got Florida there, Tiffany, fruit and veggies. All right. So that wraps up our section 1. So by the end of that section, we can reorient and think about, did we meet those learning objectives that we identified in section 1 around understanding our child nutrition programs, understanding what they look like in our locale, and understanding the differences in child nutrition programs. So section B, we are moving on to local food sourcing and procurement in school meals. We know it's everybody's favorite, so hope everybody's excited about local food procurement. And again, just want to reiterate, we want to give producers enough information to be able to have that conversation and understand those decision making for school food service. So we're starting out here to think about, what does the farm to school supply chain look like? So here we see, and again, just to reorient, we're on slide 27 in our facilitator guide. We want to highlight these different pathways. And in module 2, we're going to hear from Robert going in depth on these different pathways and what they look like and how producers might approach them differently. But here we just want to give that big picture to identify that there are multiple pathways for producers to be able to sell to schools. Let me just reorient to my notes here. Excuse me. So we're going to then help producers understand, what does it look like for sourcing and serving of local foods in child nutrition programs? So here in slides 28 through 30, as you can see here, we want producers to help understand what local looks like. Again, this is part of that kind of myth busting that oftentimes producers and sometimes even school food service professionals think that when we're talking about farm to school or local, we're only talking about fruits and vegetables. But we really want to elevate that local purchasing and local selling to schools can really cross the whole menu and cross the whole plate, as we see here. We also want to highlight that the idea of local is dependent on that decision from the schools, and that the definition of local doesn't necessarily have to be inhibitive. This doesn't mean that they can only sell to the school district that is right next door to them, and that definition of local may vary from school district to school district, but there is not necessarily a set definition. And maybe that's something to talk about within your specificity of regionalization too. Maybe your state has a program that maybe gives increased reimbursement for local products, and that definition of local might be defined. So you want to highlight here again that opportunity for regionalization, any programs or definitions of local that are set or defined by your state or locale. We also touch on here how schools incorporate local foods beyond those standard meal times. This is, again, another great opportunity for regionalization to talk about the different programs, State Plate or Harvest of the Month, that create opportunity for connectivity between producers and schools, and to elevate how these opportunities can be pathways for relationship building for producers to get those products and increase sales to schools. And this really ties back to that introduction section where we talked about cultivating relationships and identifying pathways for producers to align with school district needs. So you can see here we have a lot of additional tips around regionalization, what kind of items and activities, Harvest of the Month, State Plates, different opportunities to highlight what's happening within your state or region. We also want producers to get a sense of timing when it comes to purchasing. Again, we know this is going to vary from locale, but we do want producers to be thinking forward about when they need to be building those relationships and when school food service programs are making those decisions. We know that school food buyers, they can't necessarily, at the drop of the hat, identify a new producer. They may be going through processes of RFPs. They may have a cycle, a certain time that they put those RFPs out. So we want producers to be thinking about where within the cycle the school districts that they may be working with are, when they should be building those relationships, and when they can expect that buying to happen or that decision making to happen. So this is just an example, and you can definitely update this if you know a little bit more about how programs in your state function, if there is kind of a specific calendar or kind of a general timeline that programs are working on. But here we really want to highlight again the opportunity that there's a certain time that producers might want to be building relationships. So, and then there's also going to be a time when those solicitations happen, and that may not be in perfect alignment with the school year. So we want producers to know kind of those different calendars to be thinking about. So that takes us to our next applied activity. Oh, excuse me. So our next applied activity is really an opportunity for producers to see all of these pieces coming together in action. So if everyone could move to page 40 in their facilitator guide, that's slide 32. And in your producer workbook, you can go to page 12. That's going to be where our associated worksheet and case studies are. So on page 12, you'll see the start of 3, what we're calling our mini case studies. And on slide 32, you'll see these directions and facilitator instructions for this applied activity. So in this activity, producers could be divided into groups. If you're in person, maybe by table, or you could even, if you're doing this virtually, you could go into some Zoom rooms to give producers an opportunity to connect with one another. But here we want them to be discussing these mini case studies. So each of these case studies highlights a different partnerships or relationship between a producer and a school food service program. And really we have the full case studies available online, but these little snippets are really designed to highlight the different components of the school food service program that make it a good fit for that producer. So I'd love for everybody to take 3 minutes, maybe 4 minutes. We can just turn off cameras if you feel better to, and I'll go on mute for you to choose one of those mini case studies on page 12 and 13. And as you're reading one of those mini case studies, keep in mind these questions that we have on our worksheet on page 14. So after reading, we're going to be asking producers to reflect on what makes that school meal program and school district a good fit for the producer in the case study. So let's take about 4 minutes to read, and then we'll come back and I'm going to ask you to share the answer to that question. All right, would anybody be willing to share what they saw in the case study that they read? If you want to share which one it is and what you saw that made that a good fit, please feel free to unmute.
Hello. I can try to take a stab at it.
Great.
I was drawn towards the microgreens farm in Phoenix, Arizona. I thought it was very good that they got into the fresh fruit and vegetable program, because that helped make it easier for the school nutrition director to source that food from that farm legitimately in a food safe way. And I'm drawn to this because we're actually working with a microgreen farm to do just that. So I'm really interested in their story. But I also thought it was a really good point to, again, how the farmer, farmers have to wear so many different hats, and how important it is that the farmer recognizes that they also have to be the marketer of their own product and make sure that their customer is satisfied. So really it's about, it's not only about farming, but it's also about marketing relationships and, a business approach to being able to make sure that the customer is satisfied. And I thought that last sentence in that paragraph is just right on, focusing on how your product can meet their needs is a good place to start. Because oftentimes it's like just getting started with farm to school, it's so overwhelming, like nobody's needs can be met, it seems like. But being able to take baby steps and be like, hey, let me help you, and offering education along with that is just a win-win for both sides.
Great, thanks for that. There's a lot of information packed in there. All right, and I see one more hand. Did you want to quickly address the question?
I think I can't see everybody, but I think it's me.
Jeannie, yeah.
So yeah, I was actually looking at the building sustainable relationships with school nutrition programs with Minnesota, and what really drew me towards this specific case study is that in the state of Florida, we have at least 4, maybe 5 of the largest school districts in the country. So I just thought it was just interesting to see kind of this focused growing from this farm. And I've actually seen, I believe, a couple years ago at the first farm to school conference here in Florida, we had Minnesota come and speak to us. So just I liked how it was like the status for this specific farmer, that the status and magnitude of the food service program made for an exciting opportunity. And then being able to know which vegetables, because she didn't really want to grow a lot of vegetables. So she was looking to grow fewer, that when they narrowed it down to specific vegetables to grow for the school district, that they were consistently a good fit, allowed them to be more specialized in the varieties that she was growing, and that school districts can handle large size produce, which can have high processing yield and less waste. And that the one piece that I see that I think is a challenge in some of the school districts that we work with is using a local food processor to wash, chop, package and deliver local produce for farmers like Ray. So it just kind of, I was just interested in this case study in terms of the scalability in some of the larger school districts that maybe we could work with local farmers.
Great, thanks, Jenny. Yeah, and really elevating that it's about those goals aligning, the needs of the school food service program aligning with the goals and the desires of the producer. I think that's a great example of that alignment in action. So again, leave as much time or that you have to be able to explore these case studies and point producers back to these full case studies that also come in audio versions online too. So we really want to re-emphasize the opportunities for these stories to elevate these concepts in action. So wrapping up quickly here, the last section is really around school food procurement. And the following pieces really go into depth. The following modules, so module 2, 3, and 4, go into depth on what school sales look like on the producer side. This is really just to orient producers at that high level of understanding the buyer perspective. So in this section, it covers those procurement standards that school buyers adhere to at that high level to make producers aware, the use of geographic preference and what that can mean on the local producer side, procurement methods and purchasing thresholds, again, highlighting the need to make sure that that's localized and specific to your state. We include the federal thresholds here, but making sure that you are adapting that to your state, and that high-level overview of the procurement process. So with that, we go into the wrap up and conclusion and action planning. We have a game for producers that is aiming to help dispel myths. So let's do this one really quick as an example. You can unmute and yell it out or put it in the chat box. If I am not a fruit and vegetable producer, this is a true or false question. I cannot sell my products to child nutrition programs. True or false? False. All right. So we've got a series of those questions that we encourage you to go through to help kind of tie some of these myth busting pieces together. And then, just as Jenny Lee emphasized, we want to come back to this idea of reflecting on what this means for our action planning. Have producers met these goals and checking in on what steps they need to take to further this connection and their understanding of school meal programs and their action planning. So I know I rushed through that little last bit a little quickly, but I think the aim is to really emphasize there are lots of activities here to reinforce these ideas, and we encourage you to take the time and lift up all of those interactive activities for producers and pull out the pieces that you find are going to be most relevant for producers working in your segment and section. So I'm going to leave it open for some questions, and then we're going to be moving into a break to reflect on some of this activities. So any questions about module 1 or the activities going in module 1? All right, well, as we're going into breakouts, if you have additional questions, Samantha asked, is it wise to have local food procurement policy or manual in place before these trainings? So Samantha, I think that depends on who's administering the trainings. So are you thinking, is your question kind of specific to should a school have a policy in place or should the agency have a policy in place?
I'm thinking more of schools. And if the school should have a policy in place, especially related to farmers, since they're building that relationship.
Yeah, I think, our aim in this training is to think of that producers might want to be working with multiple schools. So we want the producer to be able to kind of be reactive to and responsive to a variety of different policies that the school might have in place. So we encourage, I think certainly if you're planning a training, I think it's really great to be thinking about what are those policies that schools in your districts have or schools in area districts that the state might have in place to be able to introduce producers to.
Thank you.
All right, so as we're going to transition into a breakout time. And in this next breakout section, if additional questions come up from any of the content we covered this morning, we're going to come back and have additional question time later in the day. So in this next breakout section, you're going to be going back with your state teams. And as you've seen through the introduction and module 1, there are so many opportunities to lift up regional examples, lift up case studies, lift up different programs within your state or locale, producers that are doing great work, schools that are doing great work. We want you to start thinking about and brainstorming some of those case studies that you might want to elevate, as well as some of those programs and policies, whether that's a harvest of the month that you have in place, whether that's a local reimbursement program that your state has in place. So we're going to be working through Jamboards 6 and 7 to be thinking about this localization. So I think we have about 15 minutes to go into our breakout rooms, and you'll be working with your facilitator to be thinking about these local opportunities. Tracy, I think we are ready to head out.
Okay, well, I'll just start then. Thanks for joining us, y'all. My name's Robert Maggiani. I'm an NCAT staff, like Tammy and Margot and Devana, who was on yesterday. I believe she'll be back tomorrow. I'm talking to y'all from right outside San Antonio. We're in an area right now where we get about 12 inches of rain every 6 months, something like that. And unfortunately, our monthly averages are like 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 12. And so I'm in one of those months where we're in the 12. It's raining every day. And so if I go blank on you, I apologize. So anyway, we're gonna look at excuse me, module 2. We're trying to anticipate the questions that the producers will be having, kind of asking themselves in their mind. We took module 1 and essentially we tried to answer the question, well, how big is this market? Really, what are we talking about? Farm to school, national lunch program, school breakfast program, school feeding. Summer feeding. I know we didn't talk much about summer feeding, but it's still a big deal. And so when you really look at the numbers, it's really impressive. School feeding is big. In most of the cities where our farmers live, the school district is the biggest food service operation in the area. It's the biggest restaurant around. It's a lot of money flows through the schools. And so I think we got their attention by saying, you know, look at these hundreds of millions of dollars, that market that's out there. Wouldn't you like to participate in this? And so our logic model here to try to get to module 2 was to assume that they're going to be asking themselves a question like, okay, I'm interested. You got my attention. I want to play in this big market, but how in the world do I get my stuff to where they're going to use it? I live 20 miles from nowhere, and it's just not real convenient. How do I do that? And who do I talk to? How are they going to buy this stuff? I don't want to go talk to this school people and look like a fool. I want to try to figure this out. So we're trying to figure out the answer to those 2 questions with module 2. And if you'll look at again, we're going to kind of toggle back and forth between so you can get comfortable that all the examples and screenshots that we're talking about here are both available in the facilitator guide and the producer workbook. So let's look here quickly at where you see there, it says producer workbook, page 17. Let's just look at it real quickly. I think the more we get used to actually playing with the hard copy of the material, the more we'll be able to do it really easy when it comes time to do the producer workshops. So if you look at module 2, you can see we're going to kind of start with a high level look at it and get closer and closer to the ground, more and more narrow sub questions within these 2 questions that I just brought up. How do I get my stuff to the schools, and how do I do it? Who do I talk to? And so you can see we're talking about breaking the module down into 2 kind of major areas. How do I get it there? In other words, the market channels. And then section B, which I'll get into more detail here in a minute. Who do I talk to? What are the processes? What are the documents that are used in order to do this? And so you'll see on page 17, we talk about the materials we're going to be using, just like in the other modules. We're going to have case studies. We're going to have worksheets. We're going to have handouts. We are going to have online versions of everything. So all of this can be made to order depending on the state that you're from. And if you have great examples of some of the handouts that we have included in these materials, you can just change them to make it more appropriate to your audience. So again, let's look at the entire view of Module 2. You can see that this is really from page 13 in your facilitator guide. If you look across the top, just like in Module 1, just like Lacey did, you can see across the top, we're suggesting that the way we've broken this material down for this module will take approximately 2 hours. Section A will take 45 minutes. Section B would take anywhere from 60 to 75 minutes. You can see the learning objectives for each of A and B. Those are really the key. That's what we're trying to make sure the producers understand. Identifying the best market channels. Now that could be, that could be a complicated question for any given producer. So we're going to talk about how to help the producers try to figure that out in his or her mind. The core concepts, the overview of the market channels. How does product get to the school? And then here's some very specific examples of different types of channels. And then the slide deck numbers, and then some activities. Since we are dealing with adult learning here, when we're talking to producers, we at NCAT, we have kind of a certain way we try to facilitate that. And activities are a big way that we think that adult learners really kind of take a somewhat of an academic concept and really personalize. And so we have a lot of activities scattered through this. Section A can take about 45 minutes. Section B take maybe an hour, a little bit more. Okay. And now let's get even into some more detail. Here, as Lacey mentioned in the introduction in Module 1, we're talking about really helping the producers learn a new language. We want to help them get fluent in what I call school nutrition talk. It is its own kind of dialect. They have their own way of talking about things and terms. And you can see these are some of the ones that we've identified that we feel that the producers really need to get comfortable being able to talk about and being able to use. Obviously, the gentleman who spoke yesterday, Mr. Holmes, he got it down. He knows all of this stuff because he's been doing it for many years. And, I could listen to him talk all day about his experiences doing this because he knows all the kind of the intricacies of what we were talking about here. So the core concepts, supply chain, market channels, wholesale marketing practices, on-farm food safety, that's a big one, particularly in the fresh fruit and vegetable sector. Product standards, grading, these are things that most farmers will be somewhat knowledgeable about, but particularly as they relate to school food service, that's where we really want to try to help them become fluent in this talk. Let's take the next slide. And here's some even more specific terms. Let's turn, just like it indicates here, let's turn to page 105 in your facilitator guide, and let's look at some of these. I hope you've actually have the facilitator guide in your hand and you are, literally looking at it. I'm not going to read all of these, but there's a couple of them that I thought were of particular interest that even maybe some of us in this workshop here might not be too familiar with. Look at kind of halfway down the page there, collective purchasing. There's a couple of ways of doing that. When school districts participate in state and regional purchasing cooperatives and buying groups in order to help school districts obtain greater buying power. That's something that's very prevalent here in Texas. And I'll kind of use that as an example later during the discussion. But this whole idea of collective purchasing and how a producer might be able to take advantage of the existence of those agreements might be of interest to y'all in other states also. There's another one that is particularly of interest to me that I find oftentimes producers kind of cringe at and are not real excited about getting into, and that's an enterprise budget. we work with producers all the time. And so the concept of benchmarks and really paying attention to the details where, one of the first things we tell all the producers all the time is do sweat the small stuff when it comes to figuring out what are your production costs and what do you need to do to make this thing really work, to make money at. It's easy to grow a lot of vegetables, a lot of fruits, and sell a lot and have a big sales volume and go broke. So the point is, when you have an enterprise budget, let's look at what it says. A listing of all estimated income and expenses associated with a specific enterprise to provide an estimate of its profitability. Again, it's kind of easy to grow a lot of stuff and have a lot of sales and not make any money. And that's not what we want to do. That's not the path we want to take producers down. That's not where we want to go. So you can see the other key terms. Again, we might have a little bit of a knowledge of each of them. A food broker, that's an interesting concept. A lot of people never really deal with brokers. Food brokers are something in my experience, it really comes more into play when you're trying to sell to retailers. But there are some food brokers in Texas that also are big players in the school food area. PACA licensing, that's an interesting one. I don't know however many of y'all know what really PACA means. Again, it's a fresh fruit and vegetable industry thing, Perishable Agricultural Commodities Act, and there's a lot of protection built into that law that tries to protect the producers. And so it's a interesting concept that if producers are really going to get into wholesale in your fresh fruit and vegetable, you really need to pay attention to PACA licensing. Learning objectives, this is really the key to what we want our producers to understand when they get through module 2. They're pretty, there's only 5 of them, and they're really important. They have a lot of kind of a subset of important concepts beneath them. But if you just look at identify the best market channel, we're going to go over that in detail here in a minute, but that's key. Again, most of the farmers are thinking to themselves, well, I live out in the boondocks. How am I going to get anything from my farm to any wholesale place? What do I have to do? Do I need a truck? Do I have to have a cooler? Do I have to keep it refrigerated? Well, we'll see. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Understand how to read and respond to a solicitation. This one is really going to be difficult for a lot of people, a lot of producers. Again, solicitations, when you look at them, we'll look at one here in a minute, looks really impenetrable. It just takes some practice to really get used to reading them. Understand how to meet vendor requirements. Understand how to meet the product quality standards. Again, that's something that they'll have an inkling about, product quality standards. Well, I know what that means. I don't sell junk to anybody. But when you really get into the school food service stuff, you got to be way more detailed than just saying I don't sell junk to anybody. Understand how to approach and communicate with school buyers. Again, Mr. Holmes talked about that, mentioned that a number of times in his talk yesterday about he really studies that and really made a point to himself to try to understand the people he was partnering with and to understand what was their motivation and how that he could really click and how he could really connect with what he has as a way of taking care of their motivations, how to communicate, how to really understand each other. And so now let's look at in more detail in Module A. Again, we're estimating the way we've structured the presentation of this material, it would take about 45 minutes. Again, this is a guidebook, not a rule book. Y'all will be figuring that out as you go. Just like in Module 1, here's a suggestion that an activity that everybody can relate to, particularly adults that have watched Mr. Trebeck on TV for many, many years while he was on TV. Jeopardy, everybody relates to Jeopardy. It's kind of fun. You see how in this example, we've suggested that the categories that you normally see on the Jeopardy board are exactly some of the phrases and things that we really want the buyers to, the producers to be comfortable with. Market channels, that's something we want them to be able to know. What does that mean? And so school buyers, quality standards, vendor requirements, all of those things are what we want the buyers to be getting familiar with. And here's a way to kind of get them familiar with the terms in a way that they're going to have fun doing. So for example, let's take the category of market channels. I'm going to pick market channels for $400. I turn over the card and the answer is Happy Dirt. Anybody have any idea what the question is? Tammy, can you check the chat box? The answer is Happy Dirt. Does anybody, you Carolina folks are going to have an advantage on this one. Anybody know? Well, the appropriate question would be, what is the food hub located in Durham, North Carolina that used to be called Eastern Carolina Organics?
Yeah, and we had Tessa Thraves say distribution, so that was pretty close. What is distribution?
But yeah, but Happy Dirt in this specific one where I was trying to, again, do a couple of things here, use kind of make the producers think about market channels and to start learning to identify and get comfortable with the whole concept of food hubs. Even though food hubs are not brand new, they've been around for about 10 years now. In the scheme of things, they're a relatively new player in the farm to school world. So the idea was to use that question to kind of bring up the concept of a food hub. All right, so let's just take one more example. Let's go over to vendor requirements for 300. I pick that and I turn the card over and I see the words, I see the letters GAP, GAP. What's the appropriate question? Anybody want to guess an appropriate question? I bet you we have somebody who'll make a guess on this one.
Yes, we have Cindy say, what is good agricultural practices?
Very good, thank you. And again, this is something that's going to be very important to producers in the fruit and vegetable side of this. It's becoming more and more prevalent, almost a requirement to get into selling to large customers, large wholesalers, large school districts. It's a food safety certification that's done by USDA, AMS. We have a project going on with a food hub called Common Market, where we are trying to help the vendors who sell to Common Market get GAP certified. And it's also a local food promotion program project that's also funded by AMS. But one of the things that I've noticed over the last 4 or 5 years is if you're really going to sell to any big wholesalers, it's almost the only way you can sell to them is to get GAP certified. So anyway, so GAP, GAP, vendor requirements. The whole idea is to use a Jeopardy platform to really help producers kind of have fun with learning. Here's a little bit more visual way of looking at the school channel alternatives that a producer is going to be deciding in his or her mind. There are a couple of ways that we call the term intermediated channel, which means somebody's in the middle between the producer and the school that's going to use the product. There's a number of specific examples of operations that do that. And of course, the reason they do that is because they provide services that have to be done. Sometimes producers do them, sometimes they don't. And in order to really get the product to the school in the way that's safe and efficient and well-packed and all of those things, somebody's got to do it, whether it's the producer himself or herself or the intermediaries. And so you can see here in the diagram, we have about 4 or 5 different specific types of intermediated actors, I'll call them, in the intermediated channel. And then the one right in the middle is direct to school. And there's actually even more than one way to do that. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. On the intermediated market channels, you can see we talk about 4 different types of channels: the local retail outlets, regional aggregators and food hubs, value-added processors. Again, Mr. Holmes gave us an example where the producers themselves have come together to almost be their own intermediary. So they can add value to the product that they grow and then keep that value within their own organization. That's a very key thing. He didn't really talk about that much, but in my experience, and I'm sure it's been his, the ability for a farmer or a group of farmers to be able to even slightly process fruits and vegetables is a great advantage when you go to try to negotiate with food service directors in the school system. It's a huge advantage. And so the last one that we'll talk about is independent, local, and regional distributors. Let me back up for a minute, if I might. This one is kind of interesting. It may not have come to anybody's mind about how a producer might be able to sell to the school district through a local retail outlet. Mr. Holmes also mentioned that real quickly in his conversation yesterday. He was dealing with a food service director from a school system that was so small and so isolated that they bought a lot of their stuff that they use in their cafeteria through Walmart. And so that's an interesting scenario. I would venture to guess that this scenario will most likely take place in small school districts that are isolated, where the wholesale distributors really don't want to send a truck out that way. And there's not really much option for the schools to get their kind of wholesale volumes of produce except whoever is there. And so this might be a way for a producer in that scenario to work with a local retailer and say, hey, you know, I'm going to be selling to the school district, but I don't have a cooler. You got the only foods, you know, only cooler in town. How about that? Maybe I'll rent a little bit of space in your cooler, and once a week the people from the school will come out and take my stuff out of your cooler, and then they'll buy from you all the other stuff they weren't able to get anywhere else. So you create those win-win kind of scenarios where a local retailer really might have a role to play in that chain, in that channel, in some areas that are small, isolated school districts. I have heard of that in my experience here in Texas. It's kind of rare, but it does actually happen. So let's not rule it out. Here's another example. I'm gonna stop sharing here for a minute, and Tammy's gonna show kind of a short video on how food hubs, again, are now starting to be a real important actor in this school food world. So I'm gonna stop sharing. Tammy, if you will.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. I'm gonna share my screen, and just so you know, Robert, as he said, he's having some internet connectivity issues. So we just wanted to make sure to show you this video that basically is one of the embedded links in the producer training slide deck about Food Connects, a food hub based out of Vermont. So here, take a listen.
Of producers that we work with. Those producers are primarily within a 50-mile radius of us here in Brattleboro, but the more time goes on, the more that we're able to bring in some producers and some special products from a little bit farther afield. So we have this roster of producers, and we list on a weekly basis, twice weekly. We offer their products to our customers through a web portal, an e-commerce site, essentially. When they do order from us through the website or any other way that we then enter into our web platform, that delivery is made as a unit on a set delivery day, up to twice a week right now, and the customer is invoiced for that order as a unit. So no matter how many producers they're buying from at once, they're getting one invoice. We technically do take ownership of the product, but a lot of the product that we sell on what we call a just-in-time basis. We have an order cycle, customers place their orders, we cut it off, and we assemble our purchase orders for farms in our area. We send out those purchase orders to farms, and they pick, wash, and pack to order on a one-day turnaround, typically 1 to 2 days. And then we deliver that freshly picked, freshly packed product straight to the customer. When it comes to produce to schools, almost all of that is still picked up straight from the farm, delivered the next day. And that's something that we take a lot of pride in being able to do. And I think our customers really value knowing that when they're ordering from the farm, they know it's just down the road. They know they're not getting something that's been stored for days or weeks. They're getting something straight from the farm.
All right, Robert, take it away.
Okay. Okay, well, you can see that's one food hub. There's a number of things that he said that I thought were important. I think the most important for the producers who might be in your training, they might be from a close to each other in the part of the state where you're given the training. These food hubs aggregate product from a lot of different farms and bring it to one spot. So a food service director can deal with one entity rather than trying to source from 5 or 6 or 8 different producers. And buyers really like that ability. The food hub will make product similar and give it all make sure it's cooled correctly. They'll do a lot of the similar aggregator skills and tasks that the more traditional wholesalers have done, but they'll do it a lot of times where the local farmers either are owners of the food hub or very active in the food hub. For example, the one that I just mentioned, the Eastern Carolina Organics, which is now called Happy Dirt. The farmers are collectively, farmers can become owners of that or part owners of that food hub, much like a cooperative, a little bit different, but still there's an equity place in that structure for the producers. And so food hubs are a real interesting thing that have just kind of come about in the last 10 years or so, that we would encourage each of y'all. Oh, it's not, I have to do a right click here and try to get it to move here. And here's a suggested activity that you might want to do after seeing that video with your producers, is to really try to localize finding food hubs that they could then really consider about wanting to join. So this is a screenshot of a web page that belongs to USDA, AMS, Ag Marketing Service, that is a listing of all the food hubs in the country. Now, I will put a disclaimer on this thing. In order to be on this list, the food hubs themselves have to make an effort to be on the list. And so this is not as evergreen as you would hope. I'm going to click on it, and let's see if I can get it to work. Pull up the site. Let me see if I can scroll up a little bit. All right, so theoretically, we're on the AMS site, and we want to be able to show the producers in our training that what a food hub is, and maybe try to localize it. And so, Tammy, you want to see if you can get a zip code from somebody, and we can see who this resource says are out there doing their food hub thing.
All right. We have 40456 from Mackenzie Fox.
Okay, 40456. We're going to give a range of, let's say, 100 miles, and we're going to search. So it looks like we got, at least on the list at this point, we got 2 food hubs, one called the Four Hills Farm and the other one Appalachian Harvest. If you really wanted to go into some, somebody, maybe a producer in the training was going to ask a question like, oh, I heard of them before. What do they do? Well, if you go over here to this little arrow icon and click on it, that will take you to the website of this hub. And so you would leave this particular page and really go into the detail of a hub if a producer really wanted to ask you to find that out. I'm gonna do another one here.
We do have a few more.
Okay, let me have one more.
Okay, we have Ed Hunt wants you to look up 28372.
28372. Let's see who we got. Looks like we got 6 of them. And again, Eastern Carolina, you can see their Eastern Carolina Organics is still listed as the name of that hub. It's really not. If you go to the webpage, you can see that it is called Happy Dirt. So again, this webpage on AMS site is kind of a rough tool, but it is a way of showing producers that, hey, this food hub thing is not just a flash in the pan. Maybe this is really something for us to consider, and you can give them a way of when they go back home and are considering all of these things, and they're asking themselves, well, golly, I don't have a truck, and so I don't know how I'm going to get my stuff anywhere if it's got to be refrigerated. So maybe I better go check and see who are these food hubs that are close to me. And so you've given the producers a tool that will help them kind of answer all of these. Well, I can't do this. Well, yes, you can. Here's someone you can team up with and kind of get over that barrier of, well, I don't have a truck. Well, maybe the food hub can help you. All right, so if I get off of here, go back to my, all right, so let's see if it'll advance. Yeah, it did. All right, so here, we're just gonna briefly go over this. These are the other actors that we had identified as different types of intermediaries. There certainly are important, and I'm sure each of us probably knows some producers who do sell to these regional distributors and even national distributors. For farmers to do that, they have to be, they have to really up their game nowadays and have a lot of resources. They have to have, refrigerated trucks and packing sheds and all of that thing. But anyway, regional distributors is a real option for producers. We should talk about them at the training. As you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, here's some things that we really need to make mention of as we're talking to the producers. These channels can be a good match for producers familiar with wholesale practices. In other words, beginning producers are probably not going to match up well with national and regional distributors. In my experience, they just don't. Beginning producers just don't have the bandwidth to do all of the things that the big regional wholesalers and the national wholesalers ask them to do. And so let's just look real quickly at this last bullet point. Again, for regional distributors, important considerations include for producers to have an understanding of forward contracting, to have a food safety plan and food safety certification. Remember, we looked at in the Jeopardy game, we talked about GAP as a certification. That's one of the certifications that are available. There are others, but certainly GAP is one. Product quality and post-harvest handling, A producer really has to be on his A game in order to sell to these regional and national wholesalers, particularly broadline distributors. We can all think of some of the big ones: U.S. Food Service, Cisco. Another actor that comes into play are these big food service management companies like Compass and Chartwells and all of those. And that's, in my opinion, that's one of the things when a producer decides that he or she wants to go approach a school district to see if there's a match. That's one of the first things that you really need to determine. Is this school district operated by a food service management company? Because that's a whole different animal when you're trying to negotiate with school districts that are being operated by food service management companies. I'm not saying it can't be done. It certainly can be done, but it's much harder because they tend to source nationally. They have guaranteed 80% of everything that district buys has to be sourced through their to whoever their buying arm is. It's just a different beast that is much harder for producers to get involved with. And then there's a USDA food distribution program. Again, Mr. Holm mentioned that briefly yesterday. They sell to DOD. You heard him talk about those snack packs, and basically, I'm assuming that what they're doing with those is they're selling them through the fresh fruit and vegetable program, and they're giving them to the kids in the elementary schools in that state or those states that have opted into that program. And those are snacks that are given to kids in the classroom at times that do not correspond with lunch hour. So it's just a way to kind of, and it's only for elementary school kids. So it's just a whole nother avenue of ways to get your stuff into schools. It doesn't have to just necessarily go through lunches, but that is an option. But again, they've been doing it for 25 years. They really know what they're doing. In order to become a DOD vendor and to stay a DOD vendor is quite an effort. And that's a real feather in their cap that they're able to do that. That shows that they really know what they're doing. They are not just the average collection of producers.
Hey, Robert, before you move on to the direct to school supply chains, Brenda Williams did have a question about the payment terms for food hubs. And is it net 30 or what are the typical payment terms? And somebody did pipe in that it's very different for every food hub, but just wondering if you could expand on that real quick.
It is very different. And I will say in my experience with the food hubs that I've worked with closely, obviously, as I mentioned, I do work closely with Common Market, and I'm familiar with other hubs. One of the things that they offer, that they tend to offer as an incentive to get producers to align themselves with food hubs is to offer better payment practices. And so in other words, they may, Common Market, for example, pays them 14 days. And that's one of the incentives that they use when they try to recruit producers. Hey, come join us. Yes, when you join us, you lose a little bit of management flexibility. In other words, we're going to want to work with you to schedule your production, to help train you to do the packing the same way that we want it done. And that tends to be, sometimes you hear producers say, oh, I don't want to join a food hub, or I don't want to join a co-op because they're going to tell me what to do. Well, that is true. But here's another way that food hubs are trying to offer incentives for producers to join them, is to give them better payment terms. So, the technical answer is it does vary, but I think more food hubs than strictly traditional national and regional wholesalers, they will be more likely to pay in 14 days than the conventional guys. And they do it for a reason, because they know they have to do things a little bit differently in order to compete with the big guys who have been doing it forever, who are as efficient as you can be. So if you're gonna ask a food hub, in my opinion, to go up against the big guys to compete just on things like efficiency and price, they're not going to be able to. They have to add other aspects to the matrix of the value of their product. And one of those things is they pay quicker. So that's my experience. And so looking at if you remember the diagram we looked at a minute ago, it talked about the kind of the arrow right down in the middle, was calling direct to school. That is where the producer sells to the school, nobody in the middle. There's even, you might think there's only one way to do that, but there really more than one way. As I mentioned, I have seen in small school districts, isolated school districts, where the producers have used the only grocery store in town to kind of be that place where the food service, the school people come get their product. And in other words, the grocery store provides some of those services to the producer that no one else can, like cooling, like maybe a place in the back room where they could do some packaging, or maybe the producer brought a field run late one day and put it in the back room, and now he has to grade it, and so they're going to do that in the back room of the grocery store, and they will let the grocery store then take part of that sales dollar that goes to the school. So there is a way to get a local grocery store involved. Farmers markets, I've seen a number of producers do that in farmers markets that are closer to big cities. The school districts tend to be a little bit bigger, but they have an agreement with a producer or producers that, on Saturday afternoon after the market is over, somebody from the school will come by and pick up everything that's left, and they'll make the contract work to fit next. They'll use it either on the a la carte line, or they'll use it somewhere where maybe they don't already have it built into the menu, but they know how to use it, and they use it as a way of showing the people that, the kids and they go to the school, and the parents of those kids, that they really are involved in the community, and they want to try to do whatever they can to make their community and the business people in their community, which are the farmers and ranchers, to help make them successful. So I've seen that in a number of farmers markets, not necessarily in big cities, but I would say in small to medium school districts where the school people will come to the farmers markets. And I would say even the same through a CSA drop. A lot of the parents at a given campus may be participating in a CSA, and that might be a way for that producer or those groups of producers to get connected to the food service buyer. Or maybe they would just, maybe the key person with that relationship in that scenario is the actual cafeteria manager for a given campus. Those people, cafeteria managers, are influential. And so I know if we had had a chance to ask that question to Mr. Holmes yesterday, he would have had plenty stories about his relationships and his friendships, developing friendships with very specific cafeteria managers, because they really do kind of run everything at a given school. And so they're influential, and he would know that. And so that's, I've seen CSAs work at given campuses where the cafeteria manager is either part of the CSA or is influenced by the people who are doing the CSA. And then the last example that you see on the chart here, purchase orders, school contracts, sell directly to school districts utilizing both formal and informal procurement methods. The scenarios that I just talked about can be either described as either formal or informal. Oftentimes they're both. For the scenario that I talked about, where a farmer's market, where someone would come and just take what's left, that's more of an informal procurement method. And a lot of times there would be a cap put on that. In other words, we'll buy what's ever left over up to $500. And so it's not a big part of what a school does, or what are a big percentage of their purchase. So it's not something that the auditors and in Texas, that's the Texas Department of Agriculture. So in my example that I'm giving you, it's not something that a school district would want Texas Department of Agriculture to see, lots and lots of informal purchases for a lot of money. I don't think TDA would mind at all if they saw an informal purchase every week. If it was only for, $300, $400, $500 a week, that wouldn't bother anybody. And they would understand the reason why that's being done. And so I don't want us to really think that informal procurement method is something bad or that should be avoided. Yes, it's something that's maybe auditors might take an extra look at, but if a food service director can defend why he or she is doing that, it's all perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with informal purchasing within certain criteria. Yes, Tammy, did you have an observation?
Well, I think you are being super thorough, but we don't have a ton of time left according to our agenda. So I'd love for you to also look at the solicitation packet, but maybe just kind of breeze through some of these quick things. And yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let's, this is another activity that we suggest that you do with the producers. Again, it's a way of kind of breaking up the time where they're not just listening and somebody's talking. It's a way of getting them to think about these different channels and what do they mean to their farm as it relates to these different aspects of their farm: the profit margin, the time investment, the equipment packaging, the insurance, the time spent marketing. All of those are important variables for farmers to consider when they think about, well, do I want to go direct to a school? Do I want to use a food hub? Do I want to use a conventional wholesaler? Those decisions have different ramifications. And this is a way, for an activity for us to really show those different ramifications, different things that might happen to his or her operation given a decision. So let me just quickly go over to pros and cons. Clearly for direct to school, you do get to often continue to promote your brand. For farmers who really want to have a brand presence and develop a brand awareness, being able to go to school and have your signage up at the schools and maybe do a farmer to school day and participate in harvest of the month. Those are all ways to keep your brand in front of everybody. Some of the drawbacks, as you would see, are increased marketing time, increased record keeping. It could be an issue of getting paid on time. So again, pros and cons. There's things that you'll say, oh yeah, I really like that. There'll be aspects of things that you'll say, I really don't like that. But it's the whole purpose of us doing these trainings is to make sure that each producer honestly considers those decision-making points before he or she kind of leaps. And so back to the whole solicitation. What is a solicitation? This is something that's going to be hard for most producers. They tend to be, thick RFPs, requests for product, or RFAs, requests for authorization, requests for bids, are oftentimes filled with boilerplate language that is hard to read. But you can see that when we want to cut to the chase here and try to help the producers learn what is a solicitation, how do you really read one? If you look at that first slide on the left, these are the things that we need to show the producers. This is what's important about a solicitation: the background information. How are you going to bid? Where are you going to bid? What's the deadline? How do you structure your bid? What's the description of the goods and services? What's the vocabulary you have to use? What are the technical requirements? Again, the timeline, the terms and conditions. There may be an RFP issued that says, I haven't seen one, but it's certainly not illegal. A school district could issue an RFP and specifically say, we might take 60 days to pay. That's perfectly legal. And if a producer doesn't really realize that and puts a bid and gets accepted, well, guess what? Then they're kind of in a hole, and they're going to have to work around that. And so Another thing that we need to make sure that we're really highlighting to our producers is the whole thing of product specifications, specs. Okay, you see this slide down here. Specifications describe product standards to meet the needs of the school market. Again, just referring to the fruit and vegetable sector, a lot of specs will either list one or two or very few varieties. In other words, they won't just say, we need 50 cases of apples a week. They're going to say, we want 50 cases of Red Delicious or Granny Smith or Rome or whatever the variety is that the school wants. And so if the producer doesn't have that variety, then he or she obviously can't make that bid. Standards in size and in pack size. It's not listed here, but obviously another aspect of product spec, very important nowadays as it relates to food safety, is temperature. School districts now, in my experience here in Texas, almost regardless of the size, regardless of the order size that they have, when that product hits the back door, they're going to temp it. And if it doesn't pass temp, they're not going to accept it. And that's really even a load of 20 cases. So you better be able to have your product delivered at the temp that is acceptable for that product. Here's an example that you can look at in your workbook. I'm trying to remember. Tammy, do you know off the top of your head where that is?
Yeah, I just also put it in the chat, folks. So it's on page 65 of the producer workbook.
Okay. The reason I want to take a little bit of time to look at it, it's very detailed. This is a great tool that you can, again, give to the producers. They can take a quick look at it during the training, or when they get back to their farm, they can look at it at their leisure and see how detailed it is. It's almost intimidating, but it's the real world. And so we want to be honest. We want to be straightforward with producers and say, you know, Durango Public School is not a big school system. I would call it a kind of a mid-range. I did see their stats the last time we did this training. I think it was like 20 or 25,000 lunches a day. So it's not a big school district. But look at this. I mean, it's really pretty impressive. You go to their product list on page 76. You'll see that they specify the pack sizes. They specify the minimum delivery. I bet you later in here they'll talk about temperature. If you look back here, the checklist, their farm to school checklist, all of those things that a producer has to be able to answer yes to before they really need to put a lot of energy into trying to answer this bid. This is a great tool to, again, show producers that you know, farm to school is a very serious business. We're talking about feeding our kids. You can't come up with a more serious piece of business than what it is our kids are going to eat, right? Vendor requirements, again, post-harvest handling, food safety, insurance. Insurance is another one that farmers will really complain about. They got to have liability insurance and product liability insurance, multi-peril insurance, and it gets worse as the years go by. And I don't know that there's much we can do about it other than just get the insurance. Bringing it together. This is an interesting part that I think we need to kind of, after we've gone through all of these uh-ohs with the producers, we can say, okay, look, here's one thing that you can really add to the mix that you can do that a lot of other producers can't do. A way to differentiate yourself as a local vendor, as part of your value to the food service director there in the schools that are close to you. You can offer to host field trips. You saw the video earlier of kids doing that. Kids love to do that. The science teacher is going to love when you do that. A lot of the other teachers are going to love when you do that. So it's a real service that you're offering as part of what your product mix is. Or you can come to the classroom and do kind of farmer in the class or farmer in the cafeteria. In Texas, we have a monthly thing called Harvest, I forget what it's called, Harvest of the Month, I'm sorry. And a lot of times in certain schools, depending on the time of the year, whether whether it's a month that's for cucumbers or it's a month that's for cabbage or whatever, you can come to the school and make presentations and really kind of make a name for yourself and show that you're more committed to delivering this local product to kids than other vendors. And so you really differentiate yourself. You can support school community events. You can host events out at your farm. Here's another activity that we strongly recommend that you do with the producers at the training. It's a market readiness evaluation. I won't go into the detail, but it is quite detailed. And again, in my experience, this will ask producers a lot of questions they oftentimes don't like to ask themselves. And so it'll be a little bit difficult, and you might even have ahead of time arranged with a given producer as someone who has identified, hey, I'll be the guinea pig and I'll go through this evaluation and I'll show the other producers in the audience how difficult this really might be, where it makes us producers ask and answer questions that are hard for us to really answer to ourselves. But I think you'll find that in this activity, that can be a positive if you handle it right. And I think the way that we would handle that right would be to have a producer volunteer to do that for himself or herself. Approaching school nutrition directors is a real talent that has to be developed. Mr. Holmes obviously has that talent that he's really honed over all these years. I'm sure if we were to ask him about each of these suggestions here, he would be able to really elaborate. But let's just take a look at them real quick. Avoid judgment and don't shame school food. How many times have we heard, or wherever we're at, people will denigrate school food? I never have figured out why that is, but it is a fact. But this is one thing, this is a suggestion. We don't go and talk to school food service directors or anyone, I would say anyone, and talk about how bad school food is. It's not a good way to win friends and influence people. So let's just not do it. And so be prepared for your conversation. Know what it is you have to offer. Have done some homework on your food service director, him or her. Maybe they are farmers, or maybe they've been farmers, or they have farmers in their family. And so the whole farm connection is the way you get their attention, and for them to say, I really want to help farmers. Do some homework. Never show up unannounced. And it's not often that you come up with a never that's true, but this one is true. Never show up unannounced. Share your expertise and your passion. Remember, developing a trusted relationship takes time. We have a saying here that we've kind of talked about it within the common market. Our activity and our success develops at the speed of trust. And so it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. It's getting to know the people, it's getting to know who they know. And maybe at a given school district, maybe the person who really becomes your champion is not the food service director. Maybe it's the cafeteria manager at a given campus. And then he or she then becomes your champion in the meetings that they have on site and all of the different discussions. You can't really tell that until you start developing those relationships. Yes, Tammy.
We're gonna have to wrap it up pretty soon, so we have a little bit more time for the breakout. So
okay.
Yeah.
This last next to the last slide is really a kind of a way of suggesting that you take the producers that are there at the training, maybe divide them into sectors. You may have producers that are fruit and vegetable folks. You may have producers who are, sell cheese or milk or meat. So the idea is to break them into smaller groups where they're kind of sector segregated, and then you just make them talk with each other. You really give them a reason why. All right, people, let's be honest with each other. We're kind of with friends here. Why are we going to do this? Really, are we going to do this? Yes or no? And you really have to kind of prompt often people to say, well, I don't know. And then you just got to try to really drag out of them all of the things that they're thinking in their mind, wondering to themselves, yeah, but what about, but this is where you really want to, particularly as you put them into sectors where everybody is talking about the same type of product. Everybody's going to have the same issue, whether it's fruits and vegetables in one group, meats on the other side. If you're in a coastal area, it could be folks that have fish or seafood. Then you really you just say yes, but no, we're not really gonna let those go away unanswered. And you almost ask them, you could specifically ask them, okay, folks, we need to make sure that all of us can answer yes to these same basic questions about selling to schools. So here in this little subgroup of 6 farm, fruit and vegetable producers, I'm gonna look at each one of y'all and say, do you understand the market channel options? If you don't think that's correct, let's talk about it. So this could take, a few minutes, particularly as maybe these producers don't know each other and they haven't got to feel comfortable with each other yet. This is where the moderator, where you really have to be assertive and call people out and say, Mr. Jones, I can see from your face, you got a kind of a worried look on your mind. I ask you if you think you understand the market channels. I'm not reading your face as a yes. So I'm thinking you're telling me no. What are you concerned about? What do you think you don't know? And then you have that same interaction with each of these questions. If you can get to the point where each of your folks in your fruit and vegetable section really can answer yes to this, then you're ready for module 3. This last piece right here, this is the piece that can really be tailored to your state. These are pictures that I put up there that really related to me. You can see that picture on the left is the hatch chile harvest in New Mexico. The picture on the right, of course, is the citrus industry down in Texas. The pasture poultry one is an organization, a guy I know real well, right outside of Austin. But here's where you really tailor your presentation to the folks who are there, to the state you're in. And here's where you start listing all of the things who you already know that might be partners for your efforts at getting producers involved. In other words, excuse me, let me find my last note. School purchasing groups, we talked about them earlier. In Texas, there's a number of them that already exist. Depending on which part of the state we're doing a training in, we'll probably highlight a collective purchasing group down in the real south part of Texas, for example, that I know exists. You might go to particular school district websites that are very active in this farm to school world. City of Austin Independent School District, for example, in Texas is very active in farm to school. Their website promotes that fact. They really highlight it. And I think that would be an inspiration to these producers to show them there are some actors, some well-known actors in this farm to school world who do this and who do it well. So it's not like we're starting from scratch here. Maybe they're starting from scratch, but there are other people who can help them along. There's some question about state level requirements that we might want to go over here. Again, in Texas, I'll give you a very specific, it's kind of weird. I don't know if it exists in any other state, but in Texas, for you to be able to sell to school districts as part of your agreement with the Department of Agriculture, you have to specifically sign a form that says you are not in arrears in your child care payments. You can't be in arrears in your child care payments and sell to the state of Texas, period, in the statement. And so that's kind of a personal thing that you would have to bring up with producers, but it's the real world in Texas. They need to know that. And so this is a way that this last slide here is just an example of ways that we want to have each of y'all start thinking about, well, how do I really hyper localize my images, my list of actors, just a whole list of players to make these producers realize I can do this. We can do this. I'm not alone in my efforts to try to do this. That's it. Any observations, questions? I appreciate it.
Thanks, Robert.
Thank you so much, Robert. As you all can see, there is a lot of content in that module too, and a lot of opportunities for active engagement. There's that whole packet to go through. So we'd encourage you to spend some time familiarizing yourself with that, and please continue to follow up with questions over the next 2 days. We'll have more time to reflect. But to wrap up today, we've just got about 20 minutes left of today. We are going to go back into our breakout groups for just about 15 minutes and start to kind of pull these pieces together. Our last breakout group is going to bring us back to the trainer action plan that Jenny Lee talked us through yesterday. And we're going to collectively in our breakout group start to think about those checklists and action planning for a potential producer training. And I'd encourage folks to think both, your state may not be planning a standalone official producer training, but you may be taking some of these ideas home. So I'd encourage you to look at these questions and checklists and discussion with both of those potential perspectives, and feel free to share your ideas as it comes to how you're bringing these back to your existing trainings or how you might be thinking about a future training. So we're going to go into breakouts for about 15 minutes. As we transition, please stand up, grab a drink of water, use the bathroom. We'll take a couple of minutes to transition, do a little stretch to get that body moving, to energize you for our last 20 minutes or so here. So please, again, continue to take care of yourself, move, step away if you need to, but we're just going to spend a few more minutes in our discussions before we come back together for a quick wrap up.
All right, folks, as we're rejoining the main session, as we approach wrapping up for the day, I just want to give you all another opportunity to share any kind of thoughts that you might have about making it local. Is there a particular program, event, policy, or producer story that you think should be uplifted within the planning of your state trainings, or that you want to highlight right now as a group, or broadly, do you have any questions for presenters today or any thoughts that you'd like to share? So I'll just give a few moments to allow you all to share. You can unmute yourself or just share in the chat. And for those who just joined, just a brief moment to share any thoughts, questions, or any aha moments that you had today.
I'll share. So I know, I've been on a couple of these virtual trainings. Obviously, we all have over the past year. And sometimes it can be kind of frustrating, or seems like, we got to stick to the agenda and stick on schedule, and that's very appreciated. But also, some of the natural conversation that more of the conversation that's in the real experiences and the passion that comes through, that kind of navigates you off that course, is sometimes some of the most helpful parts of these trainings. So I would say just, don't, not they all are looking for this feedback, but don't be discouraged if things go different than the agenda. because I think it's really helpful, and like sometimes that passion and like less of the script is really meaningful. So I've appreciated everything so far. So thanks. Looking forward to the next 2 days.
Yeah, thank you, Holly. And yeah, that's always a struggle to balance organic conversations as they keep evolving and sticking to kind of our itinerary to keep everyone on track. So, but thank you for highlighting that. All right,
I wanted to say, I
yeah.
think some of the assessment tools that we looked at today are going to be really helpful and really help organize thinking about how to do things and what's a good idea and what's not a good idea.
Great, thank you for that. Ben is asking about the 2019 USDA census data, and no, it has not been released yet. All right, well, I'm not hearing or seeing any more questions, so we'll move on. Tomorrow, we'll be continuing to build on the module learning with deep dives into modules 3 and 4, and of course, time to work with your state team. But right now, we'll be ending for the day, and I just want to, again, thank you all for staying with us through another successful and informative day. We really appreciate all the work that you've put in and the time that you've invested into this workshop. So please, again, join us tomorrow and have a good evening, folks. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank y'all so much. Really appreciate it.
Take care.